Chapter 1. Selena Chase screeched as she threw her stapler, the closest thing she could find, across the room. Her assistant, Todd, poked his head in. He was the only one brave enough to deal with her when she was in a tizzy. The stapler barely missed him as it whizzed past his ear and crashed into the wall. "I'll come back when you're done throwing things." He pursed his lips and raised one perfectly shaped brow at her, knowing his signature look would work. "No, I'm sorry. I had already thrown it when I saw you. I wasn't trying to hit you." Her anger had deflated, so she flopped down into her chair and buried her face in her hands. "How could this happen?" she wailed down at her gleaming mahogany desk. "How could what happen, baby doll?" Todd came in and plopped one side of his skinny butt on the edge of her desk. Somehow, he always seemed to know exactly what he could get away with and precisely what she needed to hear. If anyone else would have ever dared to call her baby doll, she would have put them in their rightful place. But from Todd, it made her feel like he cared. Besides, he would never call her that in public or when they were working. This was personal, and she liked how he automatically shifted his behavior according to her mood. "We lost the malt deal," she spluttered, the tears starting to fall. "To Donovan Enterprises." She dragged the last word out as her uncontrollable crying began. She had always wished she could be one of those dainty criers who would dab at her tears and look fine a few minutes later. But that was not in the cards for her. She rarely broke down in tears, but when she did, there was only one word for it: ugly. "I've always found it's best to rip the bandage off all at once, so I suppose this is the best time to tell you that Twitter is blowing up with the news that Trevor Donovan is getting a key to the city." "What? Why?" She knew the last question sounded incredibly whiny, but she wasn't in control of her emotions at the moment. "Apparently, he saved a goose or some such nonsense." Todd waved his hand, letting her know he thought the accolade was ridiculous. "A goose?" she spluttered. "How the hell does he have time to save a stupid bird when he's busy stealing deals from me?" Her assistant didn't have an answer for her, so he simply shook his head. She hiccup-sobbed at the additional news about her business rival. Todd pretended not to notice that her face was a crumpled, red mess as he withdrew a monogrammed handkerchief from his tailored, silver, pinstripe suit pocket. She had to give him props for only cringing a little when she loudly blew her nose into it. When she tried to hand it back, it was too much for him, though. He held up a hand and jumped back as if it might bite him. "Keep it," he said with a barely disguised shudder. She laughed through her tears. Todd was the biggest germaphobe she knew, so his reaction was to be expected. He still cracked her up, though. "I'll have it washed and return it," she offered as she swiped the black mascara streaks from under her eyes. He didn't even bother to attempt to hide his disgust. "Just throw it out," he finally suggested before adding on a whim, "It's dead to me now." She couldn't help but giggle at him. "No one can cheer me up like you can," she admitted when her laughter subsided. "That's because no one else is dumb enough to risk getting a tape dispenser to the head to come in and comfort you." She hated it that her temper sometimes got the best of her. It was something she was working to learn to control, but obviously wasn't yet succeeding. "I'm really sorry I almost hit you," she told him sincerely before adding, "but it was actually a stapler." At his shrug, she turned serious again. "You're my only friend." "Well then, you need to get out more," her assistant teased her before pulling her in for a warm hug and flouncing out of the room. "Isn't that the truth?" She sat back in her chair and looked out over her surroundings to take stock of her situation. Her office was massive and elegantly furnished. She was one of the most powerful and wealthy women in the world. It was a fact that she was very proud of because she had worked damn hard for everything she had. She had earned it. The pesky Donovan brothers had just stolen a deal right out from under her that she had worked for months to secure. She would get even with them for that. Her only friend in the world was her gay assistant. Her love life was non-existent and had been for longer than she cared to admit. Oh, and her cat had peed in her favorite pumps this morning. Isn't life grand? She spun her chair around as she said the words to her empty office. I've worked my entire life for all of this. She waved her arms out at her surroundings, uncertain who she was talking to, but feeling compelled to continue. I guess there are some things that money just can't buy, she finished sadly before strolling over to her bar to pour a stiff drink. Chapter 2. How could you? Selena seethed into the phone. She could feel her teeth grinding together and knew that meant she would have a killer migraine later. Despite being aware that she would pay for it this evening, she couldn't stop the waves of tension from pulsing through her jaw. It was for your own good, Grant Wiltshire, Selena's mentor and father figure, assured her. You've been working too hard, and this deal would have added to your already skyrocketing stress and workload. She pictured the older, stately gentleman with his snow-white hair and alert blue eyes leaning back in his desk chair as he tried to calm her. The vision of him only served to fuel her anger. Why is that for you to decide? She countered. I've spent months on this deal, and now, thanks to you, that time was wasted. Donovan Enterprises swooped in and stole the deal right out from under me, again. Selena pressed her fingers to her forehead, where the impending migraine was already beginning to throb behind her eyebrows. She pulled up her instant messaging window and fired off a message to Todd to bring her headache medicine and water. Todd flitted into the room with her pills and a bottle of chilled water, as if he had been standing right outside her office waiting for her request. She nodded in acknowledgement, swallowed the medication, and watched Todd disappear as quickly and unobtrusively as he had entered. That mall deal is going to take a lot of hands-on monitoring and more time and effort than you have. It would have been like taking on another full-time job, since I know you wouldn't trust anyone else to run it, Grant said rationally. I wanted that deal, she told him flatly, impossibly hurt that he would go behind her back and sell his key property with the prime location to her arch nemesis, the Donovan brothers. That sale had effectively won them the entire agreement. Grant sighed before responding. You wanted to beat Trey, and now Trevor Donovan. You didn't really care about the deal. You just wanted to win it over them. Your mansplaining is draining me. Besides, so what if I did? She asked him, sounding rather like a petulant child. Why should they get to win? I've worked hard to get where I am too, and I deserve to enjoy it. But are you? Grant asked her point blank. When silence greeted him on the other end of the line, he clarified. Are you enjoying your hard-earned power and money? Because as far as I can see, all you do is chase after the next deal and more money. When do you get to enjoy it? When you're old, like me? Selena could feel angry and hurt tears forming in her lower lids. She hated showing weakness by crying, and she stubbornly refused to do it again. Blinking back her blasted emotions, she answered Grant. I am enjoying my life. She defended her choices. I like to work hard and be the best. I love winning, and that's what I'm doing. When you don't poke your nose in and ruin deals for me. That last bit sounded snarky, but she couldn't resist jabbing at him one more time for shutting her out of the massive mall deal that she had been chasing for months. Grant went on as if she hadn't said anything. You don't want to waste your life chasing an unattainable dream, hun. She smiled at the endearment. He hadn't called her that in years. Grant had been a good friend of her father's, and the only one willing to take her in after her parents' tragic car accident. He had been a stoic, demanding guardian, but he had taught her the importance of hard work and doing whatever it takes to succeed. She had learned her lessons well and turned her Ivy League degree and elite contacts into a real estate investment firm to be reckoned with. Her keen business sense and knack for knowing when to push for a better deal or walk away had allowed her business conglomerate to grow exponentially over the past few years. She was powerful and wealthy beyond her wildest dreams, but somehow it still wasn't enough. "You think I'm wasting my life?" she asked her mentor quietly, still seeking his hard-to-earn approval despite her success. "Don't you?" he asked her bluntly. Selena stared at the wall across from her desk. She blinked several times as she worked to process what Grant had said. "No, I'm not wasting my life," she finally snapped at him. "Who taught me to go after what I wanted at all costs, and to never give up, and to always win?" The words spewed out of her. She had spent her life trying to live up to this man's expectations, yet no matter what she accomplished, he somehow managed to make her still feel inferior. "Maybe I was too hard on you," he finally admitted before adding, "When will it ever be enough?" "You tell me," Selena barked into the phone before slamming it down into its cradle. Running a hand through her long dark hair, she paced back and forth, fuming. "He's the one with the problem," she said aloud to the empty room. "He's the one who is never satisfied. It's never enough for him, not me." As she whirled on her heel to walk back towards her office door, she saw the man standing awkwardly just inside the threshold. "What?" she snipped, wondering if he had heard her ranting to herself. "Your assistant said I should come on in." He justified his entry into her domain. "I'm here to give you a much-needed massage." She narrowed her eyes at him. She didn't appreciate the insinuation behind his word choice. "So you think you know what I need?" She knew she was taking out her anger at Grant on the masseur, but she needed to vent. "I can come back later," he offered, his eyes locked onto hers. She liked that he didn't look away from her. Most people averted their gazes when she was in a snit. It seemed to be a side effect of having so much power and money. "No, now will do," she told him, knowing that she needed to calm down in order to keep this brewing migraine from screeching her activity level to a halt. If she let it progress into a full-blown headache, her productivity would be shot because she would be hiding in a dark room for hours, possibly days. "Yes, ma'am," he answered politely, and she thought she saw a glimmer of a smile in his eyes as he went to set up his table. Chapter 3. "That won't be necessary." She pointed at the table he was erecting in front of her giant window overlooking the city. "I'm going to get a few things done while you do my massage, so you can come stand behind my chair." She took off her blazer and sat down in her giant leather executive chair without looking in his direction. She assumed he would comply with her request because everyone always did. That was why his simple reply of "No" caught her so off guard. "Excuse me?" Her voice and eyebrows were both slightly elevated. He went about setting up his massage table as if he hadn't heard her. She couldn't believe her eyes. Enunciating her words, she spoke to the man as if he were impossibly slow on the uptake. "You'll need to do my massage over here at my desk. There's no need for the table." Turning to look at her, he gave her an exasperated look. "It's the table or nothing," he challenged her. Selena's head kicked back as if she had been hit. No one ever talked back to her like this. It was her way or the highway. "I'll take my massage in my chair," she seethed. "Nothing it is, then." He sounded almost jovial as he began packing up the folding table that he had just erected. Appalled at his level of gall, Her mouth fell open of its own accord as she gaped at him. "Have you forgotten that I am the one paying your fee?" she finally asked him. "No, ma'am," he answered politely, even as he continued packing up his gear to leave. Turning to her, he added, "I won't charge you since I didn't do the work." His words stunned her. Most people saw her wealth and status as a means to double or triple their normal charges. "I want you to do the work," she clarified. "I need a massage, but I can't just stop everything and lay down for an hour." "Then there's nothing I can do for you." He had the audacity to smile at her. She hated to admit it, but his smile was charming. His dark hair was a smidge too long, so when it fell in front of his eyes, he swept it back with a hand. She wondered how those strong, tan hands would feel on her skin. Deciding that checking out the obstinate masseur was a sure sign that it had been far too long since she'd had a love interest, she snapped her attention back to their conversation. "You can give me a massage, at my desk, like I asked." She spoke plainly and calmly, trying to give him the opportunity to right the situation. "Look," he was starting to sound exasperated with her. "You hired me to do a job. That job is to use my hands to make you feel better." He held up the hands in question, and she couldn't help picturing them sliding over her body. "You are not going to be able to properly relax if you're sitting at your desk, continuing to work. I refuse to work on you unless you take a real break and let my healing touch work its magic on your overstressed muscles." "Refuse?" she spluttered, pretending to be angry with this stubborn man. Despite knowing that she should be annoyed by his insubordination, she couldn't help being charmed by it. No one ever stood up to her like this. Besides, she couldn't stop thinking about his healing touch, or him working magic on her. The thoughts were intriguing. She knew she was at a crossroads. She could throw a hissy fit, order him out of her office, and deal with the raging headache that was approaching. Or she could back down a little, see if this man's hands were as magical as promised, and hopefully stop this headache in its tracks, so she could get some actual work done. "Set up the damn table," she finally acquiesced, admitting to herself it was the only reasonable option she had left. He nodded, with the slightest hint of a smile turning up his lips as he went to work reassembling the table. His smile would have seemed cocky and annoying if it had been an "I won this battle" gesture, but instead it was more of a "this worked out for everyone" look. Her light pink, perfectly manicured nails tapped on her wireless keyboard as she fired off a couple of quick emails while he finished setting up his equipment. As soon as he finished, he walked over and shut off the lights in her office. She let out a slightly exasperated huff, despite the fact that not having the bright fluorescence beaming down on her provided an immediate bit of relief to her pounding head. Completely ignoring her passive-aggressive sigh, he said, "I'll go into the restroom while you get ready." With that, he was gone, and she was left to worry about how ready she should get. The nice thing about having a massage at her desk chair was that she could remove her blazer and go about her business as usual. Having an actual massage on his table left her with some awkward unknowns. She walked over to inspect his setup. He had a basket with lotions, oils, and towels. She was surprised to see that the bed was plugged into the wall. One touch of the neatly pressed sheet told her that the electricity was to warm the covers. Beginning to feel better about this, she leaned down and realized that the linens had a fresh, minty, relaxing scent emanating from them. She removed her heels and eased herself onto the bed, flat on her back. Staring up at the ceiling, she wondered if she should take off her skirt or blouse. It felt awkward to strip down with a complete stranger in her office bathroom, but she didn't want to look ridiculous for being fully dressed when he came out. "Just let me know when you're ready," he yelled from inside her private bathroom. "Okay," she responded before biting her lip and trying to decide if she should remove some more clothes. This is creating even more stress for me, she muttered under her breath. What was that? Are you ready? He asked from the bathroom. No, she snapped, still debating on what to do. Deciding that she was being silly, she stood, removed her dark gray pinstripe pencil skirt and pale gray silky blouse, hung them both on the wall hook, and scurried back to the bed in her light pink, lacy bra and matching panties. Covering herself with the sheet and lying back, she wondered if he would see her undergarments. This had to be the most unnatural thing in the world. Did other people get naked and let a complete stranger touch them? It didn't feel right, even if that stranger was rather handsome and a bit of a stubborn mule. The warmth of the heated bed enveloped her. It would have been relaxing if she hadn't been so concerned about her wardrobe. She drummed her fingertips on the mattress as she weighed her options. After flopping over onto her belly, she pulled the sheet up under her armpits. Turning her head to the side, she looked at her shoulder and realized her bra straps were showing. Her bra was sure to be in the way of the massage. Would having him lower the straps out of the way be more intimate than just removing it in the first place? It was better for him not to have to deal with it at all, right? Ready? He called out again from the bathroom. Not yet, she responded, still trying to figure out what to do. Making a snap decision, she got up and removed her bra. Hiding it underneath her shirt on the hook, she cupped her hands over herself as she scurried back to the massage table. Stretching out on her tummy, she pulled the sheet up over her, tucked it between her arms and body, and then called out to the masseur before she could chicken out. Burying her face into the circular opening in the table, she tried not to think about the fact that she was practically naked and about to be rubbed all over by a handsome devil of a massage therapist. Chapter 4. The man emerged from the bathroom in her office, introduced himself as Hunter Monroe, and told her to relax because he would take care of her for the next hour. She almost giggled at the idea of him taking care of her for an hour, but by burying her face deeper into the padded breathing oval, was able to contain it. Squeezing her eyes shut, she decided that she was being silly. This man was a professional who did this all the time. Just because she was nearly nude and feeling completely vulnerable didn't mean anything. This was a natural part of his job and probably didn't even register as a blip on his radar, despite the fact that it was the most intimate she had been with a man in longer than she cared to admit. His fingers grazed the back of her neck as he gently lifted her curtain of long dark hair and placed it over her shoulder. She felt a tingle race down her spine at that simple touch. When he lowered the sheet and tucked it firmly beside her hips, the office's cool air assaulted her back. While he poured massage oil into his palm, she wiggled nervously in an attempt to get herself adjusted comfortably. I wasn't sure what to wear, she admitted, feeling incredibly self-conscious. This is fine, he reassured her. His voice was as smooth as velvet and frustratingly calm. She felt wound as tight as a spool of thread. After he rubbed his palms together to warm the oil, he placed them on her shoulder blades. She startled at his touch, feeling jittery and overly nervous. He must have noticed her anxiety because he soothed her. Just relax. His voice was deep and sexy. It made her feel the opposite of relaxed. The smell of coconut with a hint of spearmint wafted over her, and she wondered if he was using aromatherapy to help calm her. Have you had a busy day? She asked him, uncertain what she was supposed to say. Don't worry about talking, he tried to shush her. While his fingers worked over the tight spots in her neck, it took effort not to groan from the painful pleasure of his touch. Wanting to seem like a normal person, rather than the attention-starved workaholic that she was, she tried talking to him again. Your hands must get really tired after a long day of doing massages, huh? It really works the best if you let your mind go blank and keep quiet, he suggested more firmly. Why don't you just tell me to shut up? She thought to herself. She was used to people angling to talk to her and get her opinions. Being shut down when she was trying to talk was an entirely new phenomenon. Deciding to heed his advice and attempt to relax, she closed her eyes and let the warmth emanating from the table and his soothing touch lull her into a stupor. The next thing she knew, she was startled awake when Hunter's velvety voice suggested that she turn over. She was shocked when she looked through the face pillow's opening to discover a puddle of drool on her gleaming mahogany floor. Silently praying that he wouldn't notice that, she lifted her head to look in his direction. She was careful to keep her breasts pressed to the table so that he wouldn't catch a glimpse of them, but it turned out that she didn't need to be. He was holding the sheet up for her modesty, and he was facing the other direction to give her the opportunity to roll over without her body being on display. Not seeing another alternative, she rolled onto her back. She felt exposed, lying there with her breasts uncovered. Even if he hadn't been turned away, the sheet that Hunter was holding aloft blocked her chest from his view. Still, it felt scandalous to be in such an intimate position with this stranger who had been putting his hands all over her in such glorious ways. The cool sheet felt delicious on her skin as it wafted down to cover her. Her senses felt alive and extremely sensitive. Once she was covered, Hunter turned around and gently tucked in the sheet. He lifted her right arm and began working his personal brand of magic on it. Her lids felt heavy as she watched him focus on drawing the tension out of her. As his hands worked over hers, he said quietly, "Close your eyes." She wanted to continue watching him, but it felt as if he had hypnotized her into doing his will. Her eyelids fell shut as utter relaxation washed over her. All coherent thought left her mind. The only thing that registered in her brain was Hunter's touch and how marvelous it felt. The next thing she knew, she woke up feeling refreshed. Hunter was gone, and so was her migraine. She slowly sat up, wishing that Hunter and his magical hands could do that to her every day. She let the sheet fall around her as she stretched her arms up towards her high ceiling. She didn't remember having ever felt so wonderful, like a cat with a belly full of milk, stretched out in a ray of sunshine. Her legs felt wobbly when she stood. Whatever that man had done to her had worked wonders on her body, she decided, grinning to herself. He moved so unobtrusively that she felt him before she saw him. Her office door had quietly opened, and Hunter was standing just inside the threshold, gaping at her in her lacy underwear, and nothing else. In the same amount of time as it took her to cover her full breasts with her hands, he averted his gaze to the floor. "Get out!" she screeched as he said, "I'm so sorry." Chapter 5. Selena silently fumed about the unfortunate encounter with Hunter for hours. He had to be the most talented masseur in the world, and now he had seen her half naked. She paced and tried to convince herself that maybe he had looked away before he saw anything. Deep down, she knew that she was kidding herself about that. He had seen her, and now their interactions would be impossibly awkward. Her body already craved another massage from him, but she couldn't have another appointment with him after what just happened. He had been the epitome of professionalism, and then she had flashed him and made things weird. Unwilling to take all of the blame, she said to the empty room, "What was he doing sneaking back in here anyway?" His table that still sat in the corner of her office answered her question. Not caring that it was getting late, she called Todd's cell phone. Accustomed to getting calls from her at all hours, and well paid for the inconvenience, Todd answered the phone. "Girl, what did you do to that poor massage therapist?" "Why, what did he say?" Selena's hackles immediately went up. He called me to see when it would be a good time for him to pick up his equipment when you are not around. Did you give it to him good? Todd asked. I guess you could say that, she deadpanned before clarifying. I showed him my girls. You did not! Todd sounded utterly scandalized by her confession. Not on purpose, she told him. He walked back in to get his stuff, and I was just getting up from the massage table. Were you naked? Todd breathed into the phone, obviously enjoying this, wanting every lurid detail, and not feeling a bit sorry for her. Her first instinct was to hang up on him for being so oblivious to her shame, but he was her only friend, and she needed to talk this through. No, I had on my underwear. Huh. Todd sounded perplexed. His response was cryptic, so she asked him, What? Well, I know you're my boss and I'm gay, but I have working eyeballs and I know that you are hot. You must have looked amazing, so I'm shocked that he didn't make a move. My gaydar wasn't raised at all by him. His voice trailed off as he added, I must be losing my touch. She wasn't sure whether to feel hopeful or disappointed. You think he's gay? He must be. Todd sounded confident. Honey, seeing a rack like yours would make any man weak in the knees. Heck, I might even switch teams for the night. Make that 15 minutes, he amended. She laughed at him, knowing that he was just saying that to make her feel better. Todd had never had any romantic interest in girls. He had known he was gay since early childhood. I doubt that, she teased him. Besides, you don't know. They might not be all that. It was a ploy to get him to make her feel better. He knew it, but didn't call her out on it. They are fabulous, and you know it, he teased her. She wasn't sure how to respond, so he went on. If you're in doubt, you can show them to me, and I'll give you an honest rating on a scale of 1 to 10. I'll pass on that kind offer, she grinned into the phone. Only Todd could make her feel better at a time when she should be feeling utterly mortified. Well, if you change your mind, I'm always willing to take a gander at them, he quipped. Thanks, she cut off his teasing before adding, he'll need to come in here to get his stuff as soon as possible. I don't want to look at it and be reminded of this fiasco. I'll take care of it, he promised. So, I guess I'll cross him off the list of potential massage therapists. Did your headache go away at least? Oh, yes, she practically moaned into the phone. It was by far the best massage of my entire life. I relaxed completely and fell asleep. When I woke up, my headache was gone and I had slept into the evening. I have so much work to catch up on, she added distractedly. Wait, Todd said. You were in there sleeping all afternoon? You never do that. And there I was, out at my desk, working my fingers to the bone, he added, obviously seeking praise from her. She wasn't about to give it to him. Speaking of that, she started. At her pause, he prompted her with a drawn-out, mm-hmm. Where were you? Aren't you supposed to be my first line of defense? Shouldn't you have made sure I was up and getting things on my agenda done? Why weren't you there to stop Hunter from coming in and seeing me topless? Hunter, huh? You're on a first-name basis with the hunky massage man who saw your boobies? He teased her. Out of all I said, my knowledge of his name is the only thing you comment on? She tried to sound exasperated with her assistant, but she couldn't help being amused by him. It's a good thing I like you, she finally said. Before signing off, she added, Make sure I never have to face Hunter again. Don't worry, I know exactly what I need to do, he assured her. If she had been more on her game, without the leftover noodlehead feeling from her massage, she would have noted the subtle forewarning in his choice of words. Chapter 6. Oh, I'm sorry, ma'am. Hunter nervously pushed his longish, dark hair back, away from his face. He was obviously surprised to see Selena in her own office. "I'll come back another time," he offered, already backing out the door. "No, don't be silly," Selena answered, deciding not to tiptoe around this anymore. It wasn't her style to be awkward, and she didn't like how it felt to shy away from anything. She would, however, have words with Todd for obviously not complying with her wishes to not have an embarrassing encounter with Hunter. The masseur stood in the threshold of the doorway, seeming uncertain about what he should do. She was used to people being intimidated by her, so she tried to put him at ease. "Get your stuff." She waved her hand in the direction of his table. "Sorry," he apologized again, not looking her in the eye as he shuffled quickly over to pack his things. "This has probably been in your way." "Not at all." She tried to sound normal, despite feeling mortified by what happened the last time he walked into her office. "But you can't make any money with all of your equipment sitting in here." "I do all right," he said vaguely, making her wonder how he could earn a living without the implements needed to do his job. As he bent over to fold his table, she couldn't help noticing how long and lean he was. The man had the type of hard body that should be sculpted into a statue, and those marvelous hands. She became lost in thought for a moment as she remembered the glorious feeling of having him work his talented hands over her skin. She feared that after he walked out of here, she would never find anyone that could relax her body like he had. He truly had a gift. As she pondered him, she decided that seeing naked people was a regular part of his job, and that he probably looked at the human form in the detached way that doctors and other medical professionals do, unless they're in a sexual situation. Unwilling to settle for another massage therapist now that she'd had the best, she felt determined to smooth things over with him. "You really are fantastic at your job," she started. He looked at her and swept a lock of hair from his forehead. He tried tucking it behind his ear, but it wasn't quite that long. She wondered why he didn't get it cut rather than messing with it all the time, but she did have to admit that it gave him a slightly dangerous and incredibly sexy look. "Thank you, ma'am," he finally answered. "It's Selena," she told him, trying to bring some casualness into their interaction. People normally called her Miss Chase, but she didn't want to be that formal with this man. After all, he'd already seen her half naked and brought more pleasure to her body than anyone else had bothered to do in a long time. "Selena." He said her name simply. She liked the way it sounded coming from him. His voice was deep, but he spoke quietly. She found herself leaning towards him, aching to hear what he would say next. His movements were slow and precise. Before long, he had his belongings packed and appeared ready to leave. "I'll get going," he offered, before adding, "I'm sure you have important business to attend to." She did have plenty to do, but that was always the case. She didn't want to let him walk out the door without clearing the air between them. She hoped to be able to get more massages from him without both of them feeling anxious. "About earlier," she started, before clearing her throat, sounding uncharacteristically bashful. During her awkward pause, he jumped in. "I should have knocked. I'm sorry about that. But I didn't think you were in here." "I know," she assured him. "I hope I didn't make you too uncomfortable." He shook his head, looking down at her plush, off-white carpet. "I felt many things when I saw you, but uncomfortable wasn't one of them." She was dying to know what he felt at seeing her, but he didn't seem willing to elaborate. She wondered if his feelings were positive. They had to be, right? Didn't all men like seeing bare boobs? Todd even admitted that he would like to see them, and he's gay. She licked her full lips nervously, trying to figure out a way to ask him if he would be willing to keep her as a client after what had happened. She would pay him well, of course. He chose that moment to look at her. His gaze was intense, and she wondered if he might cross the room and kiss her. Instead, he said, "I should go," took his gear, and quickly left her office, shutting the door behind him. Well, for someone who normally moves so slowly and gracefully, he sure hightailed it out of here, she said to her large, now empty office. So much for that, she decided sadly before turning on her heel and heading back to her massive desk. With a huge sigh of frustration, she sat down to begin the lonely task of catching up on her neglected emails. It wasn't long until she opened her drawer and dug into her secret stash of mini Hershey bars. Chocolate normally made everything better, but tonight it seemed that no amount of the sweet and delicious candy bars could ease her stress. Chapter 7. Selena was only half listening as Todd went through her agenda for the day and gave her a rundown of everything she needed to know. He was reading through her phone messages when he finally caught her attention. "Oh, and that massage therapist guy Hunter called." Even though Todd's voice had been monotone, he had said the magic buzzwords that made Selena snap to attention. "He did?" she asked with more enthusiasm in her voice than she intended. She tried rather unsuccessfully to tone it down when she asked, "What did he want?" Todd was already narrowing his perceptive green eyes at her. "You like him!" he accused jovially, already enjoying himself. "No," Selena scoffed, trying to sound believable. "We just had a very awkward moment, thanks to you." She glared pointedly at her assistant, who held up his hands in mock surrender. "Excuse me for having a life," he defended his decision to leave the office without telling her goodbye. "I figured you'd be in here working half the night away. I couldn't have known you were sleeping on the job." She narrowed her gaze at him in response to his somewhat accurate accusation. As much as she wanted to blame him for what had happened, she knew it was as much her fault as anyone's. Besides, she cherished her friendship with Todd and enjoyed their easy banter with one another. No one else stood up to her like he did. It was refreshing to have someone around who would tell her when she was being ridiculous. Her glare at him had already morphed into a smile. "Are you going to tell me what he wanted?" She threw the wadded-up napkin from her morning bagel in his direction. "Oh, assistant abuse!" He pretended to be outraged by her tossed napkin. "Tell me what he wanted, or I'm going to throw this stapler at you," she teased him. "Again?" He gave it right back to her. She couldn't help chuckling at him, but she was dying to know why Hunter had called. "Tell me," she demanded. Okay, Todd finally gave in. "He wanted to suggest that you come into his tattoo parlor to get your daith pierced." "My what?" She raised her dark, perfectly shaped brows at him, even as she processed the interesting tidbit that Hunter had a tattoo studio. "Your daiths!" Todd pronounced the word slowly and loudly. "It's this part of your ear." He pinched a section of the cartilage on the inner fold of her ear. "Ouch!" she snapped, pulling back from him. "Why would I want to do that?" "It's supposed to help with migraines," Todd explained. She leaned her head to the side and lightly squeezed the area of her ear that Todd had just pinched. How would that help? She felt skeptical, but would be willing to try about anything to get rid of the mind-numbing migraines that debilitated her on a regular basis. "It's something to do with pressure points or acupuncture or some other mumbo-jumbo. I don't know all of the specifics. Look it up on Google." "I thought you were my Google," she teased him as he turned to leave. She was already looking up daith piercings on her computer, so she didn't even bother to respond when Todd mumbled, "I'm your everything else," on his way out of her office. 10 minutes later, she buzzed the intercom for her assistant. "Make me an appointment with Hunter for daith piercing," she ordered into the phone without preamble. They spoke to each other several times each hour, so neither bothered with the usual pleasantries after their first discussion of the day. "I don't think he does them himself," Todd informed her before adding, "but I'll get you an appointment at his studio." "I want Hunter to do it," she specified, trying to make it sound like she would only accept the best, even though she was uncertain if Hunter even knew how to do daith piercings. He was the owner of the facility, so he must know how, right? "I'll take care of it," Todd responded in his all-business tone. "Thank you." She used the same professional snippiness that he had suddenly adopted. As soon as they hung up, she stood and began pacing her office. She wasn't sure whether she was more nervous about having 2 holes poked in her head or seeing Hunter again. Chapter 8. Selena stressed about everything regarding her appointment with Hunter. What did one wear to a tattoo parlor? Would she get sick or pass out? What if she bled everywhere? How bad would it hurt? Would he be happy to see her again, or would he think she was stalking him? He was the one who had called to tell her about the daith piercing idea, but he hadn't said anything about him doing it himself. She was the one who had insisted on that. The concern that she was being too forward and pushy weighed heavily in her mind, but she wanted to see him again too much to cancel the appointment. She drove herself to the tattoo studio, not wanting to have the limo draw even more attention to her. Sitting in the car alone in front of the studio, which was aptly named Tats and all that, she debated whether or not she should even go inside. In an effort to look like she belonged in such a sketchy place, she had worn her dark-washed jeans with ankle boots, a thick, white, fitted cotton t-shirt, and several silver necklaces. She looked down at her outfit and decided that it just made her look like she was trying way too hard. She started her sports car and debated her options as it rumbled loudly. Normally, she wasn't one to back down from a challenge, but for some reason, Hunter made her extremely nervous. The thought of going back home to her lonely penthouse condo to hang out with Mr. Whiskers had her turning the car's engine back off and heading inside before she could chicken out again. Once inside, she immediately regretted her decision to come here. This establishment definitely wasn't the type of place where she belonged. The walls were decorated with hundreds of tattoo and piercing ideas, many of them with photos of the body art on actual people. It appeared the studio's patrons were more than willing to have any part of their body worked on, and then they wanted their picture on the wall to show it off. Selena was cringing in sympathetic pain as she looked at the picture of one woman's multitude of nipple piercings. She couldn't imagine what would entice someone to put herself through that. She had been so engrossed in the pictures that she hadn't noticed the man who emerged from the back and now stood behind the counter. His deep voice startled her when he asked, "See something you like?" She turned to face him and discovered that his face and neck were covered with numerous piercings and tattoos. "Oh!" She self-consciously brought a hand to her collarbone as she fidgeted with one of her necklace chains. He seemed to be expecting an answer, so she tried to sound casual as she complimented their artwork. "You have some lovely options, but I work in a professional environment, so I couldn't possibly do this to my skin." Biting her lip with anxiety, she hoped her response didn't sound nearly as snooty to him as it did to her own ears. This wasn't going at all how she had planned. "Yeah, you don't look like our typical customers." He gave her a lopsided smile, which she hoped meant that he hadn't been offended by her words. She couldn't help but wonder if it pained him to smile. She had never seen someone with so many piercings. Realizing that she was staring at the large oblong circles that made his earlobes dangle down nearly to his chin, she said the first thing that came into her head. "Does all of that hurt?" "Nope," he said simply, not seeming to be at all annoyed by her question. "Looking to have some piercings done?" She could tell by his tone and the raised brow with 5 rings through it that he was teasing her. "Actually, yes." She cleared the frog that had suddenly lodged in her throat. "I have an appointment with Hunter to have my daith pierced." "Oh, boss man doesn't do piercings, but I can hook you up," he assured her. She could feel her eyes bulging as the tatted and pierced clerk tried to guide her to the back of the studio. "Oh, no," she fought back. "I want Hunter to do it." She dug her heeled black ankle boots in and refused to be led anywhere. Her formidable height and stubborn stance made it clear that she wasn't going to be bullied into anything. "Have it your way," the young man said, apparently done with her. "Boss man, there's a—" He paused during his yell to the back, obviously trying to decide what he should call her. "Woman out here to see you." She wondered if he would have called her a bitch if she hadn't been within earshot, but she tried not to worry about it too much. Before long, Hunter emerged from the back, and she immediately felt better at the sight of him. His presence was somehow calming, despite the fact that her heart was hammering wildly within her chest. He smiled when he saw her, which she took as a good sign. He was taller and had broader shoulders than she remembered. He looked like he belonged here. But he had looked like he fit within the confines of her corporate environment as well. He must be one of those chameleons that could blend in anywhere. She, on the other hand, knew that she stuck out like a sore thumb in his environment. His eyes twinkled and his expression was filled with warmth when he asked what he could do for her. She couldn't help being dazzled by him, despite the fact that she hadn't been mesmerized like this by anyone. Ever. "I'd like to have my daith pierced." She was horrified when her ears heard her mouth flub the word pierced. She clarified, even though he undoubtedly knew what she meant. Brian, the last man she had dated for any length of time, would have grabbed the opportunity to make fun of the faux pas. He would have mimicked her, "Pierced, huh?" and guffawed with laughter. Hunter, however, took the high road. He revealed a gorgeous smile, nodded, and ushered her behind the curtain and into the back of the studio. Chapter 9. She was pleasantly surprised at the plush office that he led her into. She wasn't sure what she had been expecting, but it definitely hadn't been the luxurious accommodations that she found. Rather than sitting at his large desk with her across from him, he sat on the dark leather sofa. She sat on the other end of it and nervously fidgeted with the decorative charm on her ridiculously expensive handbag. He helped ease the tension by speaking first. "So you got my message about daith piercings as an alternative treatment for migraines?" It was more of a statement than a question, but she nodded her head in confirmation. "And I assume you've done your research on it?" This time he was clearly expecting an answer. She responded with another nod, but added, "I have." Wanting to fill the void of silence that ensued, she began chattering. "I know it's not a miracle cure, but if there's any chance that it will help with my debilitating headaches, it's worth a shot. When I get a full-blown migraine, it completely shuts me down. I can't miss work whenever one decides to strike. There are too many people depending on me." He tilted his head and then seemed to look at her with fresh eyes. "It's lovely that you look at it that way. Before I met you, I would have assumed you would be worried about the loss of money more than any harm it would do anyone else." His blatant honesty stunned her, but she appreciated it. "Lots of people think I'm all about the money." She smiled sadly before going on. "But that's the one thing I don't have to worry about. I have plenty of that." "I suppose you do," he finally answered. "It's refreshing to find out that it's not your top priority, though." Shifting gears, he went through some paperwork with her and had her sign a waiver before saying, "It sounds like you are well prepared. I'll have Bones get set up to do your piercings." He stood as if to leave. She wasn't sure who Bones was, but she was certain she didn't want him or her poking any holes in her head. Even though she'd only known Hunter a short time, he was the kind of person that evoked her trust. If anyone would be poking a needle through her ear cartilage, she wanted it to be him. "Wait!" she squeaked as he headed for his office door. "Can't you do it?"
"I haven't done any piercings for a long time," he admitted. "Besides, you'll be in good hands with Bones. He's one of the best," he assured her before turning again as if to leave.
"But I want you." Her voice was barely above a whisper. He must have heard her because he stopped, with his back to her, on his way to the door. When his head snapped up and his torso tensed, she knew the flirty double entendre of her words had sunk in. Turning to face her, he gave her a long, intense look. She lifted her chin, not backing down a bit from his scrutiny. Finally, his lips turned up a bit and he responded, "Then you can have me." She could feel her cheeks burning with heat. It was a new sensation to her. She was used to being the confident owner of any situation. Blushing over a flirtatious comment was not her style, but it felt strangely delightful. The silence hung heavy in the air for a bit as they gazed at each other. Hunter came to his senses first.
"I'll go get the piercing kit,"
he informed her, and he was gone. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding and tilted back her head to stare at the beautiful, embossed, silver tin ceiling tiles. Despite how lovely the ceiling was, she couldn't focus on anything other than listening for Hunter's returning footsteps. She was anxious to return to their flirtatious exchange. When Hunter arrived with a tray of sterilized instruments, she began to feel a bit panicky. She had assumed it would be a simple needle, but the array of tools he was arranging made it look like he was getting ready to perform major surgery. He indicated for her to come sit on the large, maneuverable chair beside the table where he had set up the tray holding his torture instruments. Her stomach felt a little queasy, but she didn't want to back out now. She squeezed her hands into fists so tight that her perfectly manicured nails dug into her palms, but she complied with his request. When he eased the chair back so that she was again staring at the intricately detailed ceiling, she tried to swallow around the burning ball of bitter grapefruit that seemed to have lodged itself in her throat.
"Nervous?"
he asked her, looking down at her with perceptive eyes. She couldn't do anything more than nod. She didn't trust her voice to work properly. The fear was coursing through her veins like ice water. She had only known the immense pleasure of Hunter's touch. She wasn't looking forward to having him on the other side of a large needle from her. Wondering if she was making a huge mistake, she took a few deep breaths in a feeble attempt to calm down. Her eyes rolled around as she tried to look anywhere but at the scary instruments Hunter had brought in to use on her.
"Which side of your head do you most often get your migraines on?" he asked her. "We'll start with that one in case you chicken out and don't want to go through with the other side."
His gentle ribbing effectively brought out her stubborn side. "I won't chicken out," she told him fervently, even as she tightly closed her eyes and silently vowed to keep that promise. Taking pity on her, he took her clenched hand in his own. Gently unfolding her fingers, he began massaging her hand with his thumb. He found pressure points that she didn't even realize she had as he worked the tension out of her through her palm. When he focused his attention on each of her fingers, her mouth nearly fell open with the pleasure of it. When he finished, her hand fell limply to her side, all signs of tension having been released. She was delighted when he reached across her for her other hand and began giving it the same luxurious treatment. By the time he was done, she felt as smooth and fluid as molten lava. In one smooth move, he presented her with a soft, stuffed animal, whispered in her ear that it would only hurt for a second, and crunched the needle through the cartilage in the middle of her ear. She startled more with surprise than pain, and then cringed as she heard the magnified sound of the thread pulling through her skin to secure the tasteful silver loop through the new holes in her ear.
"That wasn't so bad, was it?"
he asked as he used cotton to clean her ear. She assumed he was wiping up blood with it, but tried not to think about it too much. "No," she answered him. "It wasn't bad at all." She inspected the stuffed toy he had handed her. It was a small dog of some sort. "Do you keep this on hand for big wimps like me who need to be comforted during their procedures?" she asked, turning to grin at him.
"I work such long hours that it wouldn't be right to have a real dog, even though I'd love to have one, so I keep Bubba here instead," he answered before grinning down at her and adding, "And yes, it helps with the weenies too."
She chuckled despite herself. She understood his feelings about the dog. She had always been in the same predicament, wanting the unconditional love of a dog, but working far too many hours to give one a good home. Mr. Whiskers was the perfect pet for her. He only wanted the briefest bit of attention before he went back to his normally sulky feline self. She felt completely charmed by this enigma of a guy. She'd never met anyone who happened to be a tattoo artist, masseur, and giant softie all rolled into one man before. It was rather endearing and intriguing. Evidently satisfied with her first piercing, he rolled his stool around to the other side of her chair so he could access her other ear. Likely trying to distract her from what he was about to do, he asked her, "So what do you like to do for fun?" She hated it when people asked her that, because she never knew what to say. Telling them that she worked all the time and that she truly enjoyed it made her sound like such a loser, but she didn't really have a lot of time for fun outside of the office. "I like to eat chocolate," she blurted out before chastising herself for responding with such a silly answer.
"Me too,"
he chimed in, kindly refraining from making her feel lame for being unable to come up with a hobby other than scarfing down sweets. She desperately searched her mind for something witty to say about her hobbies while he cleaned and prepped her ear. She was appalled when she heard her rebellious mouth blab the truth. "Actually, I like to recreate scenes I find on Pinterest with the nailed it hashtag. I have a whole YouTube channel dedicated to my failed attempts to follow the instructions and duplicate things people post."
"Oh, it's an ironic nailed it, huh?"
He nodded with comprehension.
"How fun."
His praise seemed sincere, so she decided to gush a little bit about her odd hobby. "It is. I've made cakes that were supposed to be cute baby animals, but turned out like frightening demon creatures. I tried to ombre my fingernails and hair color to match once. The nails turned into a gloppy mess, and I had to have my hairdresser pull an all-nighter to fix my hair for work the next morning." He was grinning down at her, surprise alight in his eyes.
"I would have never guessed."
"It's sort of an odd pastime, I guess," she admitted before adding, "I had to find something that I could do alone when I'm too tired to work, but too awake to sleep." She immediately realized that she had revealed too much about her pathetic and lonely existence, but it was too late to suck it back in now. Wanting to redeem herself so that she didn't look like a total loser to him, she quickly added, "My site has tons of followers. People seem to love it."
"I bet they do," he responded kindly. "I would probably get a kick out of it too, because one of my favorite things to do is look through the horrific tattoo fails that get posted online."
"No regrets!" They both exclaimed it at the same time, referring to the most famous tattoo fail that had made the rounds online. Both of them tipped their heads back and laughed. It was the first real laugh she had enjoyed in longer than she remembered, and it felt fantastic. Feeling inspired, he pulled up a site on his phone and began scrolling through. Whenever he found a funny one, he shared it with her. They both chuckled at the ridiculous tattoos. Everything from unrecognizable animals, to misspelled words, to unintended second meanings. "Do you have any tats?" she asked him when he set his phone down.
"None as epic as those," he quipped before adding, "but yes, I have a giant phoenix on my back."
"Let me see it." Her eyelids felt heavy as she said the words. It came out as a demand, even though she hadn't intended for it to sound like an order. He looked down at the floor, as was his way.
"That wouldn't be professional," he responded quietly.
Not willing to take no for an answer, Selena flirted with danger. "I showed you mine." She was daring him to acknowledge seeing her naked upper half. He raised his gaze to hers, desire swirling unguarded in his eyes.
"Mine isn't nearly as fantastic as yours, I can promise you that."
His words made her feel giddy. It was the first time he had acknowledged that he too felt the heat sizzling just under the surface between them. She sucked in a breath when he lifted his black t-shirt over his tight, tanned abs and swept it over his head before turning around to show her his back. She couldn't help but notice how his broad shoulders tapered into a V at his waist, but the commanding presence of his tattoo quickly drew her attention. The magnificent, fiery winged bird taking flight off his shoulder blades was truly astonishing. "It's gorgeous!" she exclaimed, unable to stop herself from reaching out to lightly graze her hand across it. She felt his spine stiffen and heard his breath hitch at her touch, so she was surprised when he quickly put his shirt back on and turned all business.
"We better get that other ear done,"
he said brusquely, so she nodded and wondered what had so quickly changed his mood. Chapter 10. He made short work of piercing her other ear. Once he had it cleaned up, it seemed like he was going to usher her out of his office. "Don't I get a lollipop for being a good girl?" She attempted to lighten the mood. He stalked over to his desk, opened the drawer, and presented her with a bowl of Hershey's Kisses. She gladly grabbed 3, unwrapped one, and popped it into her mouth. Not willing to let the moment slip past, she grinned at him. "My first kiss from you? Absolutely marvelous." She wasn't sure if it came off as sexy or silly, but she gave herself props for trying.
"I don't want a one-night stand," he said out of the blue.
Her head jerked back as if she had been smacked. "I don't recall asking for one," she snapped, uncertain what his deal was.
"We can't be anything more than that," he told her firmly.
She felt furious that he was telling her to her face that she would never be anything more than a fling to him, but she respected his honesty. Her first instinct was to hightail it out of his office, yet the aching hole in her chest yearned to hear what he had to say. Deciding to hear him out, she finally asked, "Why is that?"
"We're too different. Don't you see it? I wouldn't fit in your world, and you certainly don't fit in mine. We are doomed for failure before we even begin."
His direct gaze was making her uncomfortable. She was used to people diverting their eyes from her, especially when they were forced to give her bad news. She refused to admit how hard she had tried to fit into his world with her stupid casual outfit that she had stressed over, especially since he had just told her that she didn't belong here. Blinking a few times to hold back the unwanted tears, she fumed and tried to think of an appropriate response. Before she could say anything, he went on. "You belong with someone who is wealthy and dignified. You need a man that can go to your fancy parties and talk to anyone in the room. Someone who has social graces. Someone not like me." "Are you done telling me what I need?" she asked, fully annoyed. At his nod, she told him, "I can't stand guys like what you are describing. We are too much alike. I need someone different. Someone like you." It was the most she had put her feelings out there in a very long time. "We don't have anything in common. We are too different to make it work." He seemed adamant. She didn't particularly like this stubborn, negative side of him, but she wasn't about to back down. "I bet we have plenty in common," she guessed. "We just have to discover it. What do you like to do?"
"I do a lot of camping," he revealed to her.
"I love camping," she lied. He raised his head with a hopeful look at her, and she immediately wondered if she had gone too far. Chapter 11.
Whoa, whoa, whoa.
Todd's eyes gleamed with the excitement of juicy gossip.
You mean to tell me that you are going camping?
Sure, why not? She tried to act nonchalant, even though she was already feeling nervous about it. He bugged his eyes out at her.
Why not?
He spluttered before ticking off reasons on his fingers.
Let's see. You don't like the outdoors. You know nothing about roughing it. You die without your electronics. You've probably never used an outdoor restroom.
At that last one, her eyes darted in his direction. The look on her face could only be described as horrified. Shaking her head to clear the mental image of using the bathroom outside, she told her assistant, "You've got it all wrong. Camping has changed a lot since the last time you stepped a foot into the woods. It's considered to be a luxurious retreat now. In fact, there's a word for it. I looked it up online," she said proudly. "It's called glamping."
If you think that hot, handsome, and rugged massage tattoo guy is planning a glamorous camping vacation, you aren't as smart as I thought you were,
Todd informed her. For the first time, a bit of anxiety over her impending camping weekend began to creep into her mind. Her dark brows furrowed together. "He did ask if I had my own gear, or if I needed him to bring some for me." Todd's laughter echoed on the high ceilings of her office as he tipped back his head and bellowed.
"The word gear doesn't imply luxury, I'm afraid," he told her, enjoying this way more than he should be. "Did you tell him you'd be happy to use his gear all weekend long?"
Her assistant waggled his slightly overplucked brows suggestively at her to make sure she understood the true meaning of his words. She crinkled her nose. "Don't be crass," she chastised him. "Besides, I had already insinuated that I camp all the time, so I told him I'd bring my own things. I figured we could just buy whatever I need."
"I'm on it,"
Todd assured her. He was always happy to go on a shopping spree with her money.
"Do we want a tent, sleeping bag, and campfire cooking implements? Or a fully loaded recreational vehicle?"
She only considered for a moment before answering, "It's probably best to stick with that second option." He chuckled and shook his head as he was leaving. Even though he tried to say it under his breath, she heard him mumble,
"Oh, this is going to be a hoot."
She paced back and forth across her office a few times, trying to convince herself that she would fit in at the campground. Just because she'd never been to one didn't mean she couldn't go, right? It will be fine, she reassured herself over and over, until she almost began to believe it. Chapter 12. After scribbling a quick note to her cat sitter and bending to tell Mr. Whiskers goodbye, Selena went outside to wait. She thought the early dose of fresh air might calm her jitters. Hunter asked where her gear was when he picked her up in his dated, filthy Jeep Wrangler. His vehicle was a little rough around the edges, but it suited him perfectly. Selena nervously wiped her palms on her Gucci leisure suit and wondered for the 1,000th time if she could possibly fit into his world. "It has already been delivered to the campsite," she assured him, beaming a smile in his direction and trying to look composed despite her sky-high anxiety level. He gave her an odd look, but didn't make a comment about her response as he loaded her large Louis Vuitton case into the back of his Jeep. Once they were on the road, he took her dainty hand within his own much larger one and said,
It's going to be great to get away from it all for a bit, isn't it?"
She nodded, but thought about her tablet, phone, and laptop that were all tucked away within her expensive handbag. Todd had made her promise to disconnect during this weekend trip, but she wasn't sure if she would be able to keep her word. There were some things that simply required her attention. She was the boss, and no one could step in and completely fill her shoes. A multinational conglomerate didn't run itself, and it didn't stop during the night or on weekends. Despite all that, she would do her best to minimize her screen time during this trip. The ride out to the countryside was peaceful. Selena hadn't initially been thrilled to discover the top was down on the Jeep, but after the first few minutes of trying to control her flying hair, she had given up and let it blow around freely. It was a crisp, cool, and clear day, with just the edges of the chill of fall beginning to surface. The bright sun felt warm on her cheeks as she tipped her head back and enjoyed the fresh air. Hunter had an easy calmness to him that made the silence in the vehicle seem comfortable. Before long, they were pulling into the quaint lakeside campground. Hunter chuckled and pointed at the gigantic, bus-sized RV that was parked in the best campsite location, blocking the view of the smaller trailers, campers, and tents.
"Geesh, look at that monstrosity."
"Yeah, I think that's probably mine," she admitted sheepishly.
"Oh, wow."
He furrowed his eyebrows, obviously not approving of what he saw, and likely realizing that she hadn't actually been camping before. Already feeling like a failure at being an outdoorsy person, she tried to reassure him. "It will be loaded with the best camping supplies and everything we might need for a fun weekend."
"Sure,"
he said, nodding and giving her a half smile, but she sensed that he was already somehow disappointed with her. As they drove slowly through the campground, she pulled the car's sun visor down to look in the mirror and attempt to fix her hair. She couldn't help but notice how sad her eyes looked in her reflection. Why did she always end up disappointing everyone, no matter how hard she tried to fit in? When Hunter parked the Jeep at his campsite and got out to begin setting up his tent, Selena was horrified to see that her RV completely blocked his view of the lake. "We could switch spots," she offered as she walked over to where Hunter was already beginning to pitch his tent. She wasn't sure what she would do if he accepted her offer, because she had no idea how to drive the massive camper.
"Nah, I'm good."
He smiled at her before asking,
"Maybe we can do the campfire at your site?"
"Yes, that would be great." She probably sounded a bit too enthusiastic, but she was happy to be able to contribute something positive to this outing. Hunter quickly and efficiently erected his tent. Selena couldn't help but watch the muscles ripple on his back as he worked. She felt like she should be doing something, but she wasn't sure how to help. Looking up at her and swooping his hair back from his face, Hunter suggested that they go whitewater rafting at the outfitter they had passed just up the road. "I love whitewater rafting!" The lie gushed out of her. Hunter gave her a surprised look, but quickly hid it.
"Great! I was afraid we'd have to go on the beginner's rapids."
He sounded relieved that she wasn't a newbie, so she didn't have the heart to tell him that was exactly what she was. She made a scoffing sound in her throat. "Beginner's rapids." She scrunched her face up and shook her head. "Those are for wimps," she decided out loud. As she spoke, she wondered what kind of danger she was getting herself into. Chapter 13. Selena had never done anything that remotely resembled whitewater rafting, but if Hunter was involved, then she was happy to learn. Once she agreed that his plan sounded like fun, he suggested that she go get ready. "Sounds good," she smiled and tried to look confident before retrieving her luggage and heading to her camper. Once inside, she frantically dug through her clothing bag. What exactly did one wear to go rafting? She finally settled on a bathing suit under sporty dark gray capri leggings, a soft pink V-neck t-shirt, and her brand new water shoes. After pulling her hair back into a low ponytail and smearing on some tinted lip balm with sunscreen, she decided that she looked the part of a whitewater rafter, even though she had absolutely no idea what she was doing. Once they had signed their lives away on waiver forms, her palms grew sweaty at the raft launch zone as the guide rambled on about the Class 3 and 4 rapids they would be encountering on their intermediate rafting tour. She almost raised her hand to admit she had never done this before, but the fear of looking even more like a dork kept her from speaking up. She donned her helmet, grabbed an oar, sat on the edge of the raft, and tried to look as confident as the jovial people in their group seemed to be. Their guide sounded excited when he said, "We are going to have some fun today. I love taking out groups of people that know what they are doing." Selena almost cracked and admitted that she had absolutely no idea what she was doing, but she didn't want to look silly in front of Hunter or admit that she had misled him. Besides, this would be a group effort, right? One person doing the wrong thing wouldn't be enough to upset the boat, would it? Deciding that she was smart and observant enough to fake it, Selena bit her tongue and mimicked what the others were doing. Tucking her feet into the raft, she used her leg strength to brace herself and hold on. As the raft took off and began to cruise smoothly over the bubbling and churning river water, she decided that she was an incredibly fast learner and already had the hang of rafting. She even turned to the side and beamed a smile at Hunter, who heartily returned it. Relaxing the tension in her legs a bit, she decided that this nature activity might not be as bad as she had feared. In fact, she was almost having fun. That short moment of enjoyment ended quickly when their guide started barking out orders as the rapids began to increase in both size and velocity. She desperately tried to remember what he had indicated right back and high side meant when he had explained them back on shore, but in the heat of the moment as they were crushing through the rapids at a high rate of speed, she would have been lucky to remember her own name. She tried to paddle like the others, but water kept splashing into her face, and the intense jostling of the boat made it difficult to see what her companions were doing. She ended up copying their movements, but a second or two too late, which caused her paddle to crack into those of the people in front of and behind her. The water felt like it was engulfing the little raft, ready to pull it under. When Selena peeked ahead and saw the swirling, bubbling rapids ahead of them, her eyes bulged out in shock. There was no way they were going to make it through the rough waters ahead with the boat intact and right side up. She glanced over at Hunter and was surprised to find him beaming from ear to ear as if he were having the best time of his entire life. Did he not realize they were quickly floating towards their death, or at least serious injuries? If these were her last moments, she wanted to go out with confidence, so she attempted to return his smile. It surfaced more like an uncertain grimace, but it was the best she could muster under the extraordinary circumstances. When the tiny raft began barreling through the hazardous, boulder-infested, swirling section of whitewater, she tightened her grip on the paddle and dug into the violent churn with all of her might. She might not have any clue what she was doing, but she was going to do it with vigor. 1 second, she was fighting for her life. The next thing she knew, she was flying through the air. She landed with a shock in the bracing, fast-moving water. It took her a moment to comprehend what had happened. As she saw the raft, Hunter, the guide, and the others floating quickly past her, the panic began to truly set in. Hunter extended his paddle out in her direction from the back of the raft. She stretched her hand out and tried to grasp it, but it was just out of the reach of her fingertips. Fear overtook her as she watched him float further away from her. Turning her head to the side, she tried to swim sideways to get to the river's shore, but the water was moving her along too quickly. She felt completely out of control, like she was being swept away against her wishes. Fighting, kicking, and gasping for air, she worked to take command of the situation, but the river was in charge. Just when she was becoming convinced that she would be pulled under to her death, Hunter appeared in the water beside her. He wrapped his arms around her and whispered near her ear, "Just relax. Let the water support you and float you to safety." She hadn't thought of it like that before. His soothing embrace and calming words helped her to stop fighting against the rapids. She leaned back in his arms and they floated together, feet first, on top of the bubbly, fast-moving river. Hunter steered them away from smashing into boulders or low-hanging tree limbs. She let herself trust him, tilted her head back, and enjoyed the ride. Once the rapids began to give way to calmer water, they caught up to their raft. "Come on in and cool off. Selena was right. The water feels great," Hunter called up to the others. To Selena's surprise and delight, everyone except their guide jumped into the chilly river. Instead of feeling like the only loser that fell off the boat, she suddenly felt like a trailblazer that had tested the waters for everyone else. She loved it that Hunter was willing and able to shift the perception of the group in her favor. Having someone on her side made her feel warm and fuzzy, despite the cool water. He hadn't let go of her when they reached the calmer waters, and she liked the feeling of being protected in his arms. For the first time in a long time, she began to allow herself to wonder what it would be like to let someone else into her life. She liked being strong enough to be alone, but the idea of not having to live her life in solitude was intriguing. When Hunter turned his head to press his soft lips against her cheek, she felt it tingle all the way down to the tips of her toes. She decided in that moment that maybe this relationship idea deserved another whirl. Hunter didn't seem a bit intimidated by her money or power, unlike all of her previous love interests. As they floated together in the water, she realized that he just might be the one. This evening would be the true test of where this relationship was going, if anywhere. She wondered if he expected to sleep in her bed. Surely it was too soon for that, wasn't it? Chapter 14. After a late lunch on the shore and being driven back to the Jeep, Selena was wiped out. As soon as they arrived at the campground, she indicated that she was going to take a nap. She had wondered if Hunter would offer to join her, but he indicated that he was going to work on getting the campfire going. Selena never napped, except apparently when Hunter was around. Slipping into the crisp, cool sheets on her luxurious bed in the camper felt divine. Deciding that the fresh air and stress of believing she was nearly drowning had likely zapped her energy, she dozed off and power napped for an hour. She awoke feeling refreshed and rejuvenated. When she emerged from her camper, she was delighted to see that Hunter had the campfire blazing and that several of their fellow rafters from today's excursion were already gathered around it. They welcomed her into the circle around the fire as if she were an old friend, not someone that they had just met today. The immediate camaraderie of the group surprised her, considering they had only known each other for one day. She supposed that risking their lives together in that floating raft of death must have bonded them, even though she didn't know most of their names. Deciding this fellowship was a good thing and opting not to question it, she stood near the fire and tried her best to fit in. She quickly learned that Mike was the name of the loudmouth of the group, who liked to tease her. He was the only one that had ribbed her about falling off the raft this afternoon. He had also ridiculed her for looking so scared in the water. "Decided to come off the royal bus and join the little people." He used a high-pitched tone with a terrible attempt at an English accent and added a mock bow to accentuate his snarky question. Normally, she would have nodded her head, given him a fake smile, and hoped that he would stop drawing attention to her wealth. Since she had noticed that the entire group seemed to enjoy dishing it right back out at Mike, she opted to be bold in her response. "I noticed that you don't mind sitting beside the royal bus, enjoying my view and camping equipment." It was silent for a beat, and she wondered if she had just committed social suicide. She knew that many people struggled financially, and the last thing she wanted to do was rub her money in their faces. Just as she was silently cursing herself for being so socially awkward, Mike tipped his head back and bellowed with laughter. His guffawing was so contagious that the rest of the group chuckled along with him.
"You got that right, lady. I'd put up with a lot to enjoy this view."
Mike swept his hands out to indicate the pristine, undeveloped lakeshore in front of them.
"Since this eyesore," he thumbed her RV, "is blocking my view, I guess I have to be nice to you."
He verified his words by unfolding a lawn chair and placing it near the fire for her. She sat down, thanked him, and let herself be absorbed into the fun-loving group. When she locked gazes with Hunter, she couldn't help but notice that his eyes were sparkling with a tantalizing mixture of approval and desire. If she lived to be 110 years old, she would never get enough of that look from him. When they started getting hungry, Selena was impressed with how the group pulled together to provide what they could for dinner. She brought out the colorful melamine plates and utensils that she found in her kitchen, as well as hot dogs, buns, numerous condiments, and the large, fresh fruit salad she discovered in the RV's well-stocked refrigerator. The others returned from their campsites carrying various bags of chips, some more ingredients, and beverages. It was a hodgepodge meal, but everyone contributed something. Selena didn't know of a gourmet restaurant that could put on a better spread. They used long metal skewers to cook the hot dogs over the campfire. Selena watched the others and copied their movements as she twirled her hot dog near the glowing embers, trying to brown it evenly. Once she was satisfied with it, she slid it onto a bun, doctored it up with mustard and relish, and loaded her plate with sides. She couldn't remember the last time she had cooked herself a meal, and she had to admit that it was somewhat rewarding to know that she had made this delicious-smelling hot dog on her own, except for the tiny detail of starting the fire. When she took the first bite of her creation, she practically groaned with delight. The hot dog was crispy on the outside, while still managing to be hot and juicy on the inside. It was absolute perfection. Hunter hadn't yet taken a bite of his food because he seemed to be enjoying watching Selena eat hers. He leaned in close to her ear so the others couldn't hear and discreetly asked,
"Has it been a while since you've had a hot dog?"
"Ages," she practically moaned before adding, "I didn't remember them being this delicious."
"The campfire helps bring out the flavor." He grinned at her before digging into his own hot dog.
After working her way through a pile of Doritos, a smattering of Cheetos, and a handful of Bugles filled with squeezed cheese, Selena said, "I had no idea that cheese-adjacent foods could be so delectable." This comment made the entire group around the fire chuckle. Mike adopted his silly fake accent again when he said, "They don't serve a lot of cheese dust-coated chips at the country club, do they?" Feeling comfortable and accepted, Selena responded, "I wouldn't know. They don't allow my helicopter to land at the club, so I stopped going." She was only partially kidding. It was silent for a moment while the group absorbed what she had said. Once more, she wondered if she had gone too far. She didn't want to hide who she was, but she hated to flaunt her wealth. Hunter saved her by saying, "Don't you hate it when that happens? Or how about when the marina doesn't have a boat slip that's big enough for your super yacht? Ugh!" His overdramatic rendition of real-life problems faced by the 1% was just the icebreaker the group needed. Everyone started laughing and tossing out what they imagined to be the issues of the super rich. Everything from having too far of a walk from the valet stand to not being able to see the little people from the penthouse were brought up as potential problems. Seeing her moment, Selena raised a dramatic hand to her throat. You may joke about it, but you have no idea how difficult it really is when your personal chef asks to take a few days off to get married. It's horrifying. Her over-the-top performance had them all in stitches as they toasted marshmallows for s'mores. Hunter had a kettle of water heating on a tripod over the fire. With impeccable timing, he poured everyone mugs of hot cocoa with a splash of peppermint schnapps, just as the gooey marshmallows were perfectly golden brown. Selena stirred her hot chocolate as she waited for her s'more to cool enough to eat. By the time she took her first bite, the chocolate bar had melted down onto the toasted marshmallow. The graham cracker crust gave the gooey treat the perfect amount of crunch. Deciding this was the most delicious dessert she had ever tasted, Selena let the ecstatic groan escape from her throat as she savored the first delectable bite. She hadn't realized what a spectacle she was making of herself until she saw everyone staring at her. She immediately felt silly for going so gaga over a simple treat. Hunter once again diffused the tension by joking, "In my next life, I want to come back as that some more." From that point on, the evening was relaxed and fun. Selena felt accepted and was able to begin to enjoy just hanging out and being her true self with people who were practically strangers. They told stories and laughed, and even sang a song or two. It was the perfect, fun-filled night in nature, until the giant drops of rain began to fall. They all scrambled to pick up their belongings and head back to their tents before they got drenched. Selena held some plates over her head to protect herself from the sheets of rain that were now falling as she stood on the steps of her RV. "It's nice and dry in here," she offered. Everyone froze in their spots, debating whether they should stick to their guns and rough it in their beloved tents, or join Selena in the blasted bus that they loved to ridicule. It didn't take long to decide. Everyone scurried inside her safe, dry RV. She smiled when she handed out big fluffy towels to the group. She didn't bother to say that her glamping version of staying outdoors had won tonight, because she didn't have to. They all already knew it. Selena and Hunter began washing dishes while the others made themselves at home and marveled at the amenities inside her camper. When Hunter gently hip-jutted her while she washed and he dried, they shared a look that made her heart pitter-patter wildly in her chest. Mike threatened to ruin the comfortable moment by saying loudly, "It's probably been a while since you've touched dirty dishes, huh, princess?" Silence fell over the trailer's living area as everyone waited to see how Selena would react. She wasn't about to admit how long it had been since she had washed dishes. It wasn't the first snarky comment from him about her financial situation, and she was certain it wouldn't be his last. Unwilling to let this man make her feel bad about her success, she turned to look directly at him when she responded, "You know, Mike, I have noticed that you are more than happy to take full advantage of the perks of being my friend." She pointed out the icy-cold bottle of dark beer that he had helped himself to from her refrigerator. "Yet you seem to like picking on me mercilessly." He had the decency to look somewhat embarrassed, but she knew he would continue ribbing her if she wasn't completely straightforward with him. "You are more than welcome to sit out the storm in your tent if you don't approve of my luxurious lifestyle." Mike immediately began to backpedal from his condescending attitude with her, obviously not wanting to leave the safety and comfort of her dry RV. "You know I'm just teasing you, right?" He slung a beefy arm around her shoulders. Hunter surprised her by showing a bit of a jealous streak. "Hands off, buddy." His words sounded jovial enough, but he set down the plate he had been drying and firmly removed Mike's arm from curving around Selena, only to replace it with his own. Mike held up his hands as if implying he was completely innocent before joining the others around the RV's table for a raucous round of cards. Selena and Hunter finished the dishes in amiable silence. They worked together in tandem as if they were part of a well-oiled machine. Once the cleanup was finished, they rejoined the others. The group played cards, board games, and charades. It was one of the most relaxing and fun evenings Selena had ever had. She loved laughing and talking about silly topics with her new friends. She wasn't tempted, even once, to retrieve one of her devices from her handbag and stare at an electronic screen. It was the longest she had gone without technology in years, and she didn't miss it a bit. When things started to wind down, the wind was still howling and rain was pattering against the trailer's roof. Selena suggested that they all stay with her in the dry camper, and no one complained. She was happy to discover a linen closet filled with sleeping bags, duvets, blankets, and pillows. Before long, the group had settled in with makeshift beds on the sofa and floor. Only Hunter and Selena were left standing. "I have a nice big bed in the back," she offered, feeling safe to invite him since there were so many people there. Mike couldn't resist letting out a high-pitched, suggestive whistle, so Selena playfully kicked him on her way past. He let out an over-exaggerated "oomph" and earned giggles all around. Hunter grabbed a fleece blanket and gallantly offered to sleep on top of the covers. Selena didn't think that was necessary, considering the current situation they were in, but she nodded in agreement. They climbed into bed in their clothes and turned off the lights. Almost immediately, someone began snoring lightly. If Selena had to guess, she would have bet it was Mike. She and Hunter turned on their sides to face each other. "It might be a long night," he surmised. "It's okay. I haven't been sleeping much lately anyway," she revealed to him. "Why not?" She could sense his concern even though she couldn't see his features. "I always sleep on my side, but my daith piercings press into the pillow and ache when I turn my head to either side. I've tried sleeping on my back, but I just can't do it for more than a short nap." She added the last bit, thinking of the 2 naps she had taken since she had known him, her only 2 naps since childhood. "Oh, no." He sounded truly concerned. "Let's try this," he offered as he slid an arm underneath her. Pulling her close to him, he embraced her so that her head rested on his shoulder, while her ear was in the opening at the crook of his arm. The position alleviated the problem of having any pressure against her freshly pierced ear. "How's that?" he asked her. She sighed with contentment, feeling fully relaxed and comfortable. "It's perfect," she told him honestly. He leaned his head down to press his soft lips gently against hers for a sweet goodnight kiss. "Yes, it is," he agreed, and they both dozed off. Chapter 15. Selena awoke feeling like she had just enjoyed the best night of sleep of her entire life, despite the crowded conditions. The cool morning held the promise of a beautiful day, but everything outside was still damp from the previous night's torrential rainstorms. Selena and Hunter made bacon, eggs, and toast, while Mike brewed coffee and delivered steaming mugs to the others. By the time breakfast was ready, the group had folded and stowed their bedding and set the table. Their morning meal was more subdued than the boisterous games from the night before. The conversation turned to what time everyone was leaving, things they needed to take care of when they got home, and not wanting to return to work tomorrow. Selena felt desperate to hold on to the new friends they had made. She swapped social media connections with them, but no one seemed inclined to make future plans. Apparently, there had been a mutual understanding among the others that this weekend was simply a break from their regularly scheduled lives. Her instinct was to reach out to them and ask them to remain friends, but as they said their goodbyes, it became obvious that they felt their relationship had reached the end of its natural life. Hunter seemed fine with the arrangement, but she felt devastated by the loss of the first true friendships of her adult life that didn't involve her assistant, whom she paid to spend time with her. She tried not to mope as Hunter drove her in his Jeep back to her high-rise condominium in the sky. Deciding to just be grateful for her time with her temporary friends and for her budding relationship with Hunter, she smiled over at him as he pulled to a stop in front of her place. It thrilled her that he got out of his vehicle, walked around, and opened her door, even when he wasn't going in. She was used to having doors opened for her, but it was normally a function performed by individuals on her payroll. Hunter retrieved her bag from the back and handed it to her doorman for delivery upstairs. Turning to pull her into a warm hug, he asked, "Do you want to try another campground next weekend?" She loved the hopeful look in his gaze and hoped that it wouldn't go away with what she had to say. "Actually, I have a charity gala to attend. It seems like we have one every few weeks." She added the last part under her breath, not wanting to seem ungrateful, but also not looking forward to yet another formal event. At his classic, downcast look, she went on, "I was hoping you would come with me, as my date," she clarified. She watched his reaction closely and was disappointed to see the unenthusiastic look in his eyes. "I don't think so." He tried to let her down easy. "I wouldn't fit in at a fancy party like that." "Oh." She couldn't hide the disappointment in her voice. "You could try," she suggested, silently adding that she had made a serious effort to fit into his world. She felt like she had done a pretty darn good job of it, too. "Look at me," he said too loudly. "I'm a tattoo studio owner that does massages on the side for an extra income stream. I belong at a bar or beside a campfire in ripped jeans and a leather jacket, not at some hoity-toity party in a monkey suit." She felt tears burning hot in her throat and behind her eyes. "I think you'd look phenomenal in a tuxedo," she told him. "Ties cut off my circulation and make me feel like I can't breathe. It's just not my style. It is better that we find out now rather than later, right? We don't want to fall for each other, only to find out that our lives are too different to mesh." She couldn't form the words to tell him that it was too late for that because she had already fallen for him. It devastated her to hear that he didn't feel the same for her. "You're giving up without even trying to give us a real shot," she accused him. "Because I can already see that this is heading for disaster," he informed her. "You are amazing, but I'm not the right kind of man for you." With that, he rounded the corner of his Jeep, got in, and left her standing there, devastated and alone. Chapter 16. "So, how was camping?" Todd pumped her for the scoop first thing on Monday morning. "It was the best weekend of my life," she told him honestly before adding, "right up until he dumped me at the front of my building." "What do you mean, dumped you?" Todd quirked an eyebrow since he had already guessed her meaning. "I mean, literally dumped. He dropped me off and said we weren't right for each other," she said sadly. No tears fell because she had already gotten them all out of her system during the night. She'd had nothing to do but cry, since she couldn't sleep pain-free on her side without Hunter's warm arm crook to snuggle into. Once the tears had dried, she had adopted a quiet acceptance of the situation. Apparently, Hunter hadn't felt the same way about her as she had about him. She'd had the best weekend of her life, but he was right. It was better to find out now that he wasn't interested in her. If things had progressed further, she would be even more attached to him than she already was. "A clean break is better," she said aloud to Todd. She was still trying to make herself believe that it was true. "Something fabulous did come out of the weekend, though," she told him. He gave her a questioning look, prompting her to continue. "I made some friends." "Really?" He didn't bother to hide the surprise in his voice. He was well acquainted with her struggles in that department. He had been by her side through the users and snobs that she had tried to befriend in the past. Each of those relationships had ended up as miserable failures. She nodded. Well, they were temporary friends, but I know now that I can do it, she told him. She was trying to muster some enthusiasm because she had convinced herself to focus on trying to make some real friends rather than the loss of a potential romantic relationship with Hunter. Great, what's the plan? Todd jumped right in, ready to help her. The problem with people coming to me in search of friendship is that they tend to be the money grubbers, who are only using me to buy them stuff and pull in favors for them. Todd had warned her about this many times, so he was nodding his head in agreement as if her big revelation wasn't news at all. She went on, ignoring his apparent boredom. The phase I went through when I tried to befriend heiresses didn't work either. They weren't interested in my money, which was great, but they weren't interested in anything at all, other than themselves. I couldn't stand being around such vain, selfish people. I was here, remember? Todd seemed to be growing exasperated by her summarization, but she was working through it all in her own mind as she spoke to him. This weekend taught me that I am funny, witty, and a blast to be around. I just have to find the right people that I feel comfortable enough around to show those traits. It needs to be people that I choose, not the ones who seek me out. Sounds reasonable, Todd agreed. Any ideas where to find these potential friends? Yep. She couldn't hide her excitement. I'm going out to the chicken coop. She was already on her way to her office door when Todd tried to stop her. The chicken coop? That's not a good idea, baby doll. He grabbed her elbow to try to steer her back towards her desk, but she dug in her heels, refusing to be deterred. First off, the administrative assistants hate it when we refer to their area as the chicken coop, he informed her before adding in a stage whisper, We only say that behind their backs. Oh, I thought it was a cute nickname because they sound like a bunch of bickering hens chattering at each other's desks all day long. Selena was surprised to learn that the ladies didn't appreciate the name the other office workers had given their area in jest. Okay, I won't refer to anything about that. Thanks for the tip. She started to head out again. You're their boss, Todd yelled out, trying to stop her. She turned to him with a perplexed expression. I know that. So what? I'll just go out there and tell a funny story to break the ice. It will be fine. You'll see, she reassured him. They'll realize that I'm just one of the girls, she said confidently before breezing out the door. When she returned, her eyes were wide open with shock. Todd led her to her desk where he had a large cup filled to the rim with her favorite iced coffee waiting for her. I guess I don't need to ask how it went, he quipped. It was awful. She stared at the floor and answered, even though he hadn't asked. The chatter immediately stopped as soon as they saw me. It was complete silence for a moment. Then they all scrambled to pretend like they were working. Todd chuckled at that. His laughter brought her out of her daze. Why did they feel like they needed to do that? I know they are some of the hardest working people in this building. This office would screech to a halt if they weren't here. I don't care if they spend a little time blowing off steam and gossiping. Did you tell them that? Todd looked almost hopeful. No, she practically moaned. I tried to break the ice by telling them a funny story I heard this weekend about a man who wears Spider-Man underpants and drops them, along with his pants, down to his ankles in the stall in the men's room at his office. Everyone at the office tries to guess who it is, but he always manages to escape the bathroom without being seen. They think maybe he climbs the walls to get out like a real spider. Really? Todd snorted in a very un-Todd-like fashion. Yeah, it's a really funny story. We couldn't stop laughing when Mike told it around the campfire this weekend, she shared. But the hens didn't think it was funny, Todd guessed. Don't call them that, she snapped before answering his question. No, they just gaped at me like I was a bug in their soup. You're their boss, he tried to explain. So, doesn't that mean they have to be nice to me? She knew she sounded rather pathetic and whiny, but she had been convinced that she was on the verge of forging some new friendships. The knowledge that she would have to continue her lonely, friendless existence stung. You need to find some friends that don't work for you, and that are in a similar financial situation to you. It needs to be someone that knows what it's like to work, though, not one of those simpleton heiresses, he clarified. There aren't a lot of billionairesses around town, she quipped. Just keep your eyes open, and you'll find some true friends, he promised before turning to leave her office. She silently prayed that he was right, because it turned out that having it all wasn't all it was cracked up to be. Chapter 17. Deciding that she didn't have enough special people in her life to be getting angry and tossing them aside, she swallowed her pride and called her mentor Grant. She still wasn't happy with his heavy-handed approach to getting her to cut back by selling his property to the Donovan brothers, but she opted to take the high road and forgive him. Besides, he had her best interest at heart, which was more than she could say for nearly anyone else other than Todd. Grant happily agreed to go with her to the star-studded, elegant Emerald Ball Gala that weekend, so she let Todd off the hook. He was used to going with her to these events to keep her from having to be alone, and he was happy for the reprieve. Once the rack of gowns Todd had ordered from Selena's favorite boutique arrived at her office, she let him leave early as a special treat. "Don't you need my opinion about which dress to wear?" he offered. "I think I can handle it," she said confidently. Not waiting around for her to change her mind, Todd scooted quickly out of her office. She got ready for the ball in silence, wishing a fairy godmother would appear, wave a wand, and create a prince to attend the ball with her. Chuckling to herself, she decided that even though it sounded completely pathetic, she would be happy to have some talking mouse friends to help her get ready. Refusing to feel sorry for herself and opting instead to focus on the positive, Selena put on her giant teardrop-shaped diamond earrings and coated her full lips in her favorite pink lipstick. Standing back to look at herself in the mirror, she decided that she looked presentable. The sparkly silver full-length gown she had chosen was stunning. Turning her head to each side, making the earrings lightly swing, she decided that the gems were truly beautiful. They had been a loan from her personal jeweler, but she made a snap decision to purchase the extravagant baubles. She might not have a man or friends in her life, but she could buy whatever she wanted. Looking at the sad eyes of her reflection in the mirror, Selena sighed, thinking that she would give it all up for someone who would put her first. Turning to leave before she could get weepy and ruin her eye makeup, she texted Grant as she headed for the elevator. He agreed to meet her at the venue, so she rode to the museum in the back of her luxurious limo all by herself. When she arrived at the gala, she was pleased to find Grant standing on the steps waiting for her, looking gallant in a tailored tuxedo. He greeted her by pulling her into a warm hug. With the pair's imposing heights and confident stances, they must have looked like father and daughter. Selena couldn't help but wonder if her real father would have jumped at the chance to help her, like Grant had, if an accident hadn't snuffed her father's life out far too soon. She liked to think that he would have been here for her. She was confident that her mother would have been here too, rooting for her, standing by her side, and being a true friend to her. The lonely ache in her belly that longed for her late parents was familiar. She knew the desperate yearning wouldn't do her any good, so she struggled to push it down and keep her negative feelings at bay.
"Ready to go in?"
Grant held an elbow out to her, which she gladly accepted by lacing her own arm through it. "As ready as I'll ever be," she answered, giving him a warm smile and trying to look enthusiastic.
"That's my girl."
He gave her a chaste kiss on the temple before guiding her up the stairs and into the gala. No matter how many of these events she attended, some small part of her was always impressed by the ambiance the organizers managed to create. The museum looked truly lovely with the long curtains of twinkling white lights hanging from the tall ceilings. The smell of fresh-cut flowers in the centerpieces wafted over the electrified air. The ballroom was already swirling with activity. It didn't take long for Selena to spot her business rivals, the Donovan brothers. She wasn't surprised to see them each flanked by a beautiful blonde, but it was strange to see them without a desperate group of women circling them and angling for any tiny bit of attention they were willing to dole out. Maybe they're losing their magic touch, Selena decided, before scoffing at her own thought. Either of the Donovan brothers could probably seduce any woman here, with the exception of herself, of course. Even though she was used to the way things worked, it still smarted that wealthy and powerful men had their choice of companions, while a rich, smart businesswoman had to convince her gay assistant or father figure to attend events with her. Something about the entire scenario just wasn't fair, but she didn't see how things would be changing anytime soon. The meal was surprisingly delicious for a banquet dinner. The rolls were warm and served with cinnamon butter, and Selena was able to cut her steak with a butter knife. It was a relief having Grant with her because he regaled their table mates with stories and jokes that kept everyone entertained. He took the pressure off her to be witty and charming. All she had to do was smile and accentuate his tales with an interesting tidbit here or there. Once the meal was cleared, Grant asked her to dance. He swept her gracefully around the dance floor, proving himself to be the perfect companion for the evening. Once the song finished, he bowed formally before her and then suggested, "Perhaps you should take the high road and go speak to the Donovan brothers." He raised his voice at the end like a question, but she inferred that it was more of a strong advisement. The last thing she wanted to do was go over to acknowledge those two deal stealers or their bimbos, but deep down, she knew it was the right thing to do. She stopped by the bar for a drink before taking a deep, cleansing breath, standing tall, and swallowing her pride. After walking over to their table, she sat down like she belonged there. "Hello, boys," she purred before taking a sip of her red wine and grinning at them. Her relationship with them was one of surface friendliness. She wondered if Trey had enjoyed the enormous bouquet of roses she'd sent to him, or if they had caused him any troubles with his girlfriend of the hour. "Selena," Trey Donovan greeted her with what appeared to be a genuine smile. She did have to admit to herself that he would be rather handsome if it weren't for his loathsome personality. "We were actually just talking about you," he revealed. She wondered if they had been mocking her for losing out on the mall deal or discussing how she had to bring her almost father as her date to this gala. He surprised her by saying, "Millie and Ellie were just trying to convince us that we need to bring your company in to help develop part of the mall deal. Maybe you could take on the West Coast, where you already have stronger ties and holdings?" Selena couldn't quite believe her ears. There must be some kind of catch. She blinked rapidly, trying to absorb what Trey had just said. Her eyes traveled between the brothers and the two women she had so quickly written off as airheads. She searched their faces for any signs that this was a trick, but she found only kindness, sincerity, and hope in their expressions. The blonde with Trevor jumped into the conversation. "I've been digging into the numbers all week, and this nationwide project is simply too much for Donovan Enterprises to develop as a solo project in the timeframes requested. In order to hire the resources and secure the needed construction materials, we would have to seek out creative capital sources for additional funding, not to mention the logistics nightmare of local licensing, permits, environmental concerns, and the millions of other details that each site will require. It's too big of a project for us to manage alone. We need a formidable partner. We need Chase Corp, Selena. We need you." Selena felt completely stunned by this turn of events. She had hated Donovan Enterprises for so long that the idea of working with them on anything felt completely foreign to her. Her face must have registered some of her confusion because Trevor spoke for the first time since she had joined them. "What do you say, Selena? Together our companies would be unstoppable.
We could do so much good for the economy and so many people."
The wheels were already turning in Selena's mind. They were right. If their two companies worked together, rather than always fighting against each other, they could accomplish so much more. The pretty blonde next to Trey spoke up. "This makes too much sense not to be right, so we're not taking no for an answer." She tried to sound tough, but her soft voice and mannerisms didn't allow it. Trey was gazing at his date, and the love-stricken look that he gave her shocked Selena.
"Wow, you're sexy when you're bossy," he told her, before tipping his head down to nibble on her neck. The woman giggled and smacked playfully at him. Apparently feeling left out of the fun, Trevor turned to the woman beside him and brought their interlaced hands up to his lips for a kiss. She leaned forward to give him a chaste peck on the lips. He returned her soft kiss, focusing on her as if they were the only two people in the crowded ballroom. Selena wasn't sure whether to be more surprised by the fact that the Donovan brothers were willing to work with her rather than against her, or that they were each apparently completely smitten. She watched them for a moment, trying not to let the jealousy seethe that both of her rivals had found exactly what she had always wanted. "I'm in," she said simply, effectively breaking up their love fest. All four sets of hopeful eyes landed on her. As the wheels turned in her mind, she held up one finger to let them know she had a condition. "But first, I need to talk to you two lovely ladies." The men had to wonder what Selena wanted to talk to their love interests about, but they refrained from asking. The girls quickly agreed to join her out on the terrace. As she led them outside, she tried to contain her overwhelming excitement about her new idea. Chapter 18. Standing on the terrace, Ellie and Millie looked expectantly at Selena, but neither prodded her to clue them in as to what she wanted. They seemed content to let her sort through her thoughts and present them in her own time. As she looked at the two of them in their dazzling dresses, she realized that she liked them both already. They weren't just arm candy for the Donovans. Although they were both classic beauties, they were also smart, sassy, and opinionated women that held their own against two of the most powerful men in the world. These were the types of ladies that Selena should be friends with. She was already beginning to feel a connection with them, and she hoped that the idea forming in her mind would bring them even closer. "My parents weren't wealthy," she started out. "I can remember them struggling to get by, living from paycheck to paycheck and constantly worrying about paying bills before they passed away." Both women nodded as if they had experienced similar financial upbringings. Neither interrupted her, though. "After they died and I went to live with Grant, I never again heard anyone worrying about the financial strains of day-to-day living. To this day, though, I haven't forgotten what it felt like to be afraid that we might not be able to pay our bills, or that we could lose our house." She searched the other women's eyes and found only understanding and empathy there. $100,000 would have made such a difference in my parents' financial situation. It would have taken away all of their strain and given them a cushion to fall back on during tight months. She tried to keep the excitement tempered in her voice, but it was hard to contain. "Oh, yeah," Millie was nodding her head. "That would have been a life-changing amount of money for my parents when my siblings and I were young. It still would be." Hearing her confirmation made Selena feel even more confident that where she was going with this was right. This mall deal is going to be incredibly profitable for Donovan Enterprises and Chase Corp. What if we took a small percentage of the proceeds and put it directly back into the local communities? Selena's words were coming faster. The more she shared with them, the more excited she became. "Every time the charity fund reaches $100,000, we can donate it to a local family that deserves it. It can be like a scholarship program, but for families in need. We will be able to help real people all over the country." Ellie's eyes had taken on a dreamy expression.
Yes, think of the people that are working hard every day just to get by. This would give them the leg up they need to go back to school, start up their dream business, pay off their house, or just have a cushion so every month isn't a struggle. I love it, Millie weighed in. The excitement of Selena's idea was already gleaming in her eyes. Count us in, Ellie told her before adding, we'll get the guys on board. Selena loved it that these ladies were already calling the shots with the Donovan brothers. Those two needed softened up, and it appeared that Millie and Ellie were already doing a great job of making her rivals more human. Fantastic! I'll have a meeting set up next week for us to start working through the details. Selena tried to infuse enough enthusiasm into her voice that her new allies wouldn't sense the sadness just beneath the surface. She tried to shuffle them back inside, but Millie had already noticed that something was amiss. What else is going on? Your eyes don't look happy, the intuitive woman said. It's silly. Selena tried to brush off the other woman's concern. She knew that she should be happy. However, even with the good news her business life had just received, her personal life was still a train wreck. Ellie reached out to take Selena's hand warmly within her own. Tell us, she encouraged her. It was the first moment of female bonding that Selena had enjoyed since childhood, and it felt glorious. She felt silly for the tears that were threatening to streak down her cheeks and mess up her makeup. She knew that she shouldn't be letting what was missing from her life overshadow what she did have, but she wasn't able to stop herself. Even though she felt ridiculous, it felt good to have girlfriends to talk to that really seemed to care about what was going on with her. Selena hated to admit to any weakness, but it was such a relief to vent to compassionate ears. It's about a boy, she practically wailed. He's rugged, handsome, and sweet, and I'm nothing but a spoiled rich brat. We already know that last part isn't true, Ellie told her, looking to Millie for confirmation. Millie complied by fervently nodding her head in agreement. He said we're from two different worlds. I don't fit into his world of camping and tattoos, and he doesn't belong in mine of business meetings and extravagant wealth. We are too different to make it work. She gladly accepted the tissue Ellie offered her and blew her nose with a loud honk. It seems like maybe you could both make some concessions to make it work, Ellie tried to cheer her. He doesn't want to be with me, Selena wailed. I find that impossible to believe, Millie told her at the same time as Ellie said, There's no way that's true. Selena gazed through her teary eyes at her new friends. It felt incredible to have found people that were in her corner. Although she had just met these women, they had already forged a tight bond. She truly believed that they wanted only the best for her. Millie snapped her fingers with an idea. I know just what to do, she told them, already pulling out her cell phone and getting to work. Selena had no idea what the other woman was up to, but she didn't worry about it because she knew that her new friends were on her side. If she had known the details of Millie's plan, she would have been concerned. Chapter 19. I look ridiculous! Selena rubbed her hands over her skin-tight black leather outfit as she stared at her reflection in the museum bathroom's mirror. No, you look smoking hot, Ellie reassured her as she reached up to tease the dark hair at the crown of Selena's head. The clothes that Millie had ordered from their company's personal shopper and had delivered directly to the gala venue somehow fit Selena perfectly, with the exception of being tighter than anything she would have ever chosen on her own. It's too tight, she tried. No, it's sexy and perfect, Millie reassured her. Unable to keep her insecurities at bay, Selena turned to her new friends. What if he laughs at me? Then he'll have us to deal with. Sweet Ellie tried her best to sound tough, but she failed miserably. I'm sure that will frighten him, Selena quipped sarcastically. It should, Ellie stuck up for herself. If nothing else, I can throw cupcakes at him. Her silly threat had all three of the women giggling. It's not too much? Selena asked, seeking one final bit of confirmation. There isn't a man alive that could resist you in this leather ensemble, Millie promised her. As an afterthought, she added, As a matter of fact, why don't you try to slip out of here without Trey or Trevor getting a look at you in that outfit? Selena rolled her eyes at that. As if either of those lovesick puppies have eyes for anyone except you two. Neither of the women had a comeback for that because they all knew it was absolutely true. Selena noted the confident, happy smiles that curled up the lips of the other two women and longed to feel that way herself. She was worried that Hunter would turn her away, but her new friends looked so hopeful for her that she felt like she had to give it a try. Besides, at this point, she knew she would always wonder what would have happened if she didn't go. Evidently deciding that the sleek ponytail was complete, Ellie used the restroom's free supply of hairspray to finish off her creation. Millie had used makeup from her own beaded handbag to give Selena dark, smoky eyes and deep burgundy, shiny lips. When they stood back, Selena turned her head from side to side, inspecting her new, tough girl reflection. Her hair somehow had volume in the front, but was perfectly straight and sleek in the back. Her makeup was bolder than anything she would have dared to try on her own, but she had to admit that the look was incredibly striking. At least if Hunter turned her down, she would know that she had tried her best. Nodding her approval and trying to feel as confident as she looked, she turned to her new friends. "Thank you," she told them, infusing her words with sincerity. The two women immediately pulled her in for a group hug, surprising her with their easy warmth. "Okay, that's enough. We don't want to mess up our masterpiece," Millie said as she pulled back for one last look at Selena. "Go get your man," Ellie encouraged her. Selena nodded, took a deep breath, and held her head high as she exited the restroom. It didn't take her long to find Grant in the crowded ballroom. His impressive height, topped by a bright white puff of hair, was both distinguished and unique. His eyes twinkled as he told her that it was fine for her to leave. She could tell by the paternal way he smiled at her that he approved of her new look. Even though she didn't tell him where she was going, he seemed to already know. Heading for the front doors of the museum, she had to walk right past the Donovan brothers. One of them let out an appreciative whistle. Selena had no idea which man it was because they both received exasperated looks from their girlfriends. Those looks were all it took to draw the brothers' attention back to where it belonged. Selena couldn't help but smile to herself as she noticed out of the corner of her eye that both couples were kissing. She was pulling her cell phone out of her purse to call for her car as she walked out the giant double doors. When she looked up to keep from falling down the museum steps, she was shocked to discover Hunter standing on the landing, gazing up at her. Chapter 20. Selena froze, almost dropping her phone down the museum entrance's first flight of steps. If she lived 1,000 years, she doubted she would ever see anyone as handsome as Hunter in a fitted tuxedo. The enamored look with which he was gazing up at her nearly took her breath away. Even the disturbance of hearing Millie, Ellie, and the Donovan brothers clamor out behind her didn't distract them from gazing at each other. Selena vaguely registered hearing Millie say, "I just want to make sure she made it out of here okay." "She has her own limo and driver. Why would she not be able to handle—" Selena wasn't sure which of the Donovans was speaking, but he stopped short when he saw her. The foursome was quiet for a moment while they took in the scene before them. "Is that him?" Ellie stage whispered from behind Selena, loud enough that Hunter had no doubt heard her. Selena nodded her head, never taking her eyes off the gorgeous man standing on the landing below her. The subtle movement was enough to set Hunter into action. He took the stairs 2 at a time until he was standing directly in front of Selena. Neither of them took note of the man huffing up the stairs behind them until he stopped a few below Hunter. "What are you doing? We need to go find Selena." Todd's voice trailed off when he caught sight of Selena in her new clothes. "OMG, is that really you?" He climbed the last few steps and circled Selena with his arms crossed, obviously assessing her makeover. "Damn, girl, you could almost make me change teams." "Almost." Selena beamed upon hearing her assistant's wholehearted approval. His opinion was important to her, and she knew that he would be brutally honest with her. She noted that Hunter's gaze never wavered from her, and her stomach did a flip-flop at the desire she saw flickering in his eyes. Hunter reached up to loosen his bow tie. "I hate these things," he revealed, "but Todd said I had to wear it." "Well, you can't go to a gala without formal wear." Todd bugged his eyes out as if he couldn't believe someone would suggest such a thing. At his condescending tone, Hunter looked down and brushed his hair back. Not taking notice, Todd went on. "Speaking of that, this doesn't look like any of the items I had sent over for you." He waved his hand up and down to indicate Selena's new clothes. "I wanted to toughen up my look because I was heading over to see Hunter at the tattoo parlor," Selena told them. At this, Hunter's gaze snapped up to hers. "You were?" His voice sounded hopeful. Selena couldn't do any more than nod before Todd took over the conversation again. "You know what this is, don't you?" His voice oozed with barely contained enthusiasm. Todd's eyes nearly popped out of his head when he and Ellie exclaimed at the same time, "Grease!" "Yes," he clapped his hands together excitedly. "It's just like Sandy and Danny at the end of one of the greatest screenplays ever written, Grease." His eyes took on a dreamy expression when he continued. "She tries to toughen up to fit in with his gang, and he earns a letterman's jacket to impress her." "Sandy!" Hunter exclaimed, immediately ready to jump in on the fun. Not one to miss out and overly familiar with the movie in question, Selena quipped the famous movie line, "Tell me about it, stud." She tried to pooch out her lips in a sexy pout, but feared that she just looked perturbed. Millie and Ellie were both squealing with happiness behind them. One of the brothers deadpanned, "We're not going to break into song, are we?" An idea flashed in Hunter's eyes. It was as if the other man's sarcasm had dared him to sing. His voice didn't hold a candle to John Travolta's character, Danny, from the movie. Selena couldn't help but giggle when he raised his hands dramatically and sang. She was nervous about joining in, but felt like this was an important memory in the making. She placed a palm on Hunter's chest and gave him a playful shove. She sang to him and was thrilled to hear both Millie and Ellie backing her up on this silly song. By the end, even the brothers joined in, and they were all singing and dancing to the catchy tune on the front steps of the fancy museum. They all started laughing as they wrapped up the song. Todd was the first to speak. "Are all billionaires this fun-loving and silly?" Selena beamed at him before turning to give Hunter a serious look. "Falling in love must bring out the joyous side in us." Hunter didn't hesitate. He climbed to the last of the steps, dipped Selena back, and kissed her like he was sharing a piece of his soul with her. Lost in him, Selena could barely stand on her own 2 feet when Hunter righted her, placed a palm on either side of her face to help steady her, and told her fervently, "I'm falling in love with you too." They were the words she had been aching to hear for so long, and they made her feel impossibly happy. Stepping in for more sweet kisses from him, she was only vaguely aware of the make-out sessions her 2 new friends were enjoying with her former foes. "Well, you guys know how to take a party from fab to awkward in a matter of seconds," Todd said to the 3 ridiculously happy, oblivious couples. He sounded snarky, but Selena knew that deep down he was happy for her. Once he realized that he was being ignored, Todd stalked to the museum entrance. Although Selena was totally absorbed by her sweet reunion with Hunter, a portion of her consciousness stayed focused on Todd to make sure he wasn't really angry. Todd alleviated her concerns when he tossed up his hands and grumbled to himself, "I'm going to go find myself a hot babe to snuggle with tonight. I suddenly have a hankering to rewatch Grease for the 10,000th time." With that, he was gone, and Selena was left to adore the smoking hot tattoo artist, massage therapist, camper extraordinaire who had donned an uncomfortable tuxedo and came to an event he would likely hate just for her. "I feel so lucky," she smiled up at him. "I'm the lucky one," he told her before pressing his soft lips against hers. When he pulled away and Selena's eyelids fluttered open, she grinned up at him and realized that she finally really did have it all. Epilogue. Selena hung up her cell phone after a long chat with Millie and Ellie. The trio's charity had wings of its own now. They had hired people to oversee it, but the three of them still liked to be directly involved in the selection of the grant recipients. It was rewarding work that they all truly enjoyed. There was nothing like seeing the relieved and thrilled looks on the faces of the hardworking, deserving families when they were informed that they would be receiving the funds. Selena was thrilled to hear that her suggestion of a nailed-it section in Ellie's bakery had been a huge hit. Ellie joked that she let Trey and Trevor have a hand at decorating whenever she needed a new idea for the funny, botched section. Evidently their artistic skills were severely lacking. "I guess they can't be good at everything," Millie quipped, making all three of the ladies giggle. It felt really good to have helped her friend do even better with her already thriving bakery business. Ellie had thanked her profusely and offered to give her a cut of the profits, since it had all been Selena's idea. But seeing Ellie so excited and successful was all the thanks Selena needed, and she told Ellie that. Before they hung up from their call, Ellie insisted the least she could do was send her a sweet treat. She knew that was something Selena couldn't refuse. "It's already on its way to you," Ellie informed her before signing off. "I hope she sends something chocolate." Selena waggled her dark brows at Hunter after she had hung up the phone. "Ellie knows you, so I'm sure it will be," he reassured her. Selena couldn't help but notice that Hunter seemed oddly nervous. He was pacing back and forth on the plush beige carpet in her condo, rubbing his hands together. He was normally frustratingly calm and relaxed, so his anxiety seemed amplified. Mr. Whiskers came to investigate but darted off when he sensed the nervous energy Hunter was emitting. When the buzz sounded on her intercom, he went to answer it and cracked her front door open for the delivery driver. While they waited for the delivery person to ride up the elevator, Hunter's jitters seemed to go into overdrive. Selena couldn't help but wonder what was going on. She told herself that he wouldn't break up with her after how well things had been going between them, but she couldn't keep that tiny bit of niggling doubt completely at bay. When the door finally opened wider, she was shocked to see Millie, Ellie, and the Donovan brothers. Ellie was holding a pink bakery cake box. Selena smiled at her friends. "Doing deliveries in person now?" she teased them. "This one's special." Ellie's lips curved up with barely contained giddiness. Trey carefully helped her lift the top off the cake box and set it aside. Selena was surprised when they handed the container to Hunter to deliver the last few steps to her. She had assumed Ellie would want to show off her creation herself. When she caught a glimpse of the top of the cake, Selena immediately understood. Hunter balanced the cake on one palm as he lowered himself to one knee and popped open a ring box that he had pulled out of his pocket. "Selena, will you make me the happiest man in the world by marrying me?" He gazed up at her and she almost melted at the loving look in his eyes. She smiled down at the cake. It had ugly stick figure people, with one presenting the other with a ring. The wording said, Serena, will you marry me? Holding a hand to her mouth, she chuckled at the misspellings as happy tears threatened to spill over her eyelids. As she glanced around the room, she realized everyone was waiting with bated breath for her answer. I just have one question, she teased. At Hunter's nod, she asked, Is it chocolate? It is, Ellie confirmed. It's perfect for us, Selena gushed about the cake, before turning her eyes back down to the man she loved. You're perfect for me.
You're perfect for me, Hunter grinned up at her. So are you going to marry him or not? One of the Donovan brothers groused.
Yes, yes, she finally answered her now fiancé. With an ecstatic look on his face, Hunter stood, set the cake down on the coffee table, and slid the impressive, sparkling diamond ring onto her finger. She was thrilled to see that it fit like it was made for her. There was a whoop of excitement from the other side of the room as Hunter picked her up and twirled her around. Selena was amazed to see the happy looks on her friends' faces. She had finally found her tribe, and she was going to cherish them all for the rest of her life. Make that the rest of her long, happy life. The Donovan brothers have a sister named Tess who wants to marry a prince. The prince's kingdom is in financial trouble, so he needs Tess, but he loves her best friend. These three are royally at odds. Can they all get what they want, or will their secrets ruin everything? Find out in the Royally Broke Billionaire, Royal Wedding Blues.